Have you ever seen a man so dangerous that a crowded room holds its breath when he walks in? At Manhattan's most elite restaurant, everyone was terrified of the city's most notorious crime boss. They all cowered until one exhausted minimum-wage waitress decided she'd finally had enough. The air inside Il Sogno, the Michelin-starred fortress of culinary excess nestled deep in Greenwich Village, was always thick with the scent of white truffles and old money. Getting a reservation here required either a 6-month wait or a black American Express Centurion card casually slid across the Metrodor's mahogany podium. Harper possessed neither. What she did possess was a mountain of medical debt from her mother's extended stay at Mount Sinai Hospital, a threadbare NYU hoodie she wore on her commute, and exactly 3 days of experience as a server in the high-stakes world of fine dining. It was a Tuesday night, exactly 8:15 p.m., when the temperature in the dining room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harper was polishing wine glasses near the service station when she noticed the shift. The usual hum of wealthy patrons clinking baccarat crystal fell to a hushed, nervous murmur. The maître d', a polished Frenchman named Henri, who usually carried himself like royalty, practically sprinted to the heavy oak double doors. "Who is that?" Harper whispered to Tommy, a senior waiter who was suddenly gripping his order pad so tightly his knuckles were white. "That," Tommy breathed, his eyes wide, "is Adrian Costello." Harper raised an eyebrow. Adrian Costello didn't look like the mobster she'd seen in movies. There were no fedoras, no cheap tracksuits. He looked like a ruthless Wall Street titan. Dressed in a midnight blue bespoke Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Harper's college tuition, he moved with the terrifying, predatory grace of a man who owned everything he laid eyes on. On his left wrist, a platinum Rolex Daytona caught the dim chandelier light. He was flanked by 2 men who, despite wearing tailored suits of their own, clearly carried concealed weapons beneath their jackets. Costello didn't wait to be seated. He walked directly to corner booth 4, the most secluded and defensible table in the restaurant facing the door. "I'm not going over there," Tommy muttered, backing away into the shadows of the service alley. Last month, a busboy spilled a drop of Pellegrino on his shoe. Costello didn't say a word, just stared at him. The kid quit the next day and moved back to Ohio. "Someone has to take his table," Harper pointed out, grabbing her order pad. "Better you than me, new girl." He destroyed the last 3 servers who looked him in the eye. Tommy shoved a crisp $100 bill into Harper's apron pocket. "Here, a hazard pay advance. Please, just take my section." Harper looked at the $100 bill, then at the terrifying man in booth 4. She was running on 3 hours of sleep, a stale bagel, and the crushing weight of a final eviction warning on her apartment door. She simply did not have the energy to be afraid of a rich man with an attitude problem. Smoothing down her black apron, Harper marched straight into the lion's den. As she approached the table, the 2 bodyguards subtly shifted, blocking her path. Costello raised a single manicured hand. The guards parted silently. He didn't look up from his phone, his jawline sharp and rigid. "Good evening," Harper said, her voice steady, devoid of the trembling reverence he was clearly accustomed to. Sparkling or still? Costello finally slowly lifted his gaze. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, a piercing, cold gray that seemed to analyze and dissect her in a fraction of a second. He was accustomed to waitstaff stuttering, bowing, practically begging for his approval. Harper just stood there, clicking her pen with a quiet snick, snick, snick sound, looking at him with mild impatience. "Still," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "And bring the 2015 Sassicaia, decanted. If it hasn't been breathing for exactly 20 minutes before it touches my glass, I'll have the bottle broken over the sommelier's head. 20 minutes. Understood, Harper replied dryly. And for dinner? Or are we just threatening the staff tonight? The silence that followed was deafening. One of the bodyguards actually gasped, his hand twitching toward his lapel. Henri, watching from the podium across the room, looked like he was about to faint. Adrian Costello leaned back against the plush velvet booth, his eyes narrowing. He studied the tired bags under her eyes, the defiant set of her chin, and the complete lack of fear in her posture. A slow, dangerous smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "The veal chop," he said softly. "Medium rare. Tell the chef if it's overcooked. I'll buy this restaurant just to fire him. Veal chop, medium rare. I'll make sure to pass along the real estate threat," Harper replied seamlessly. She turned on her heel and walked away, feeling his heavy gaze burning into her spine every step of the way to the kitchen. The kitchen was in pure chaos, but when Harper handed the ticket to the expediter and casually relayed Costello's demands, the entire line froze. The head chef practically shoved a sous chef out of the way to personally oversee the veal. 20 minutes later, to the exact second, Harper returned to corner booth 4. She carried the silver tray with the decanted Sassicaia and a single crystal glass. She poured it with practiced precision, stepping back as Costello lifted the glass to the light, swirling the dark ruby liquid. He took a slow sip. Harper waited. "It's too cold," Costello declared, his tone flat. "It's barely 60 degrees. I am not drinking chilled red wine like a barbarian." Any other waiter would have panicked. They would have apologized profusely, offered to comp the bottle, and begged for forgiveness. Harper, however, had spent her morning arguing with insurance adjusters. Her patience for wealthy arrogance was completely tapped out. She stepped forward, leaned slightly over the table, and placed her hand flat on the cool linen cloth, bringing her face just inches from his. "Mr. Costello," Harper said, her voice dropping to a harsh, quiet whisper meant only for him. "That bottle is stored in a climate-controlled cellar set precisely to 62 degrees, which is the exact cellar temperature recommended by the Tenuta San Guido estate. If you wanted it at room temperature, you should have called 20 minutes earlier. Now, I can either leave it here to warm up, or I can go to the back and fetch you some ice cubes like a child. Your choice." The bodyguards lunged forward. Costello shot his hand up, stopping them dead in their track. He stared at Harper. The tension in the air was so thick you could choke on it. For an agonizing 10 seconds, neither of them blinked. Then abruptly Adrian Costello threw his head back and laughed. It was a rich, booming sound that echoed through the silent dining room, startling the other guests. "Leave the wine," he chuckled, shaking his head. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" "Harper." "Well, Harper, you're the first person in 5 years to tell me no without a gun in your hand." The rest of the service went flawlessly, though Costello's eyes never left her as she moved around the floor. When he finally stood to leave, he didn't wait for the check. He dropped a black leather money clip on the table and walked out into the Manhattan night. When Harper went to clear the table, she found 3 crisp $1,000 bills tucked under his empty crystal glass. Beneath them was a napkin with a phone number and 2 words scrawled in black ink, "For the ice." She crumpled the napkin and threw it in the trash. She wasn't an idiot. Getting involved with the mob was a death sentence. But a week later, the danger came to her. It was a rainy Thursday. Costello had returned, claiming corner booth 4 as his own. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. He wasn't relaxed. His bodyguards were practically vibrating with tension, scanning the room like hawks. Midway through Costello's appetizer, the heavy front doors swung open. 3 men walked in. They weren't wearing bespoke suits. They wore heavy leather jackets dripping with rain. "Harper, walking out of the kitchen with a tray of hot soup, recognized the shift in the room immediately. This wasn't old money. This was the Moretti crew arrival faction, operating out of Brooklyn, that had been bleeding into Costello's territory. The largest of the three men, a bruiser with a jagged scar across his neck, bypassed the host stand and marched straight toward booth 4. Costello didn't stand, but his hand subtly slid beneath his tailored jacket. The bodyguards unbuttoned theirs, a shootout in the middle of a Michelin-starred restaurant. Harper saw the trajectory. She saw the innocent couple at the adjacent table, and without thinking, her survival instincts kicked in. As the scarred man reached into his coat, preparing to draw right in the middle of the dining room floor, Harper accelerated her pace. Just as she crossed between the rival thug and Costello's table, she deliberately caught the toe of her shoe on the thick Persian rug. With a perfectly calculated shriek, Harper pitched forward. The silver tray flipped. 2 bowls of scalding hot French onion soup launched through the air, directly onto the chest and face of the scarred Moretti enforcer. The man screamed in agony, his hand flying out of his coat emptied to claw at the searing cheese and broth burning his skin. The sudden chaotic distraction broke the deadly standoff. The restaurant erupted into gasps and commotion. Costello's men instantly drew their weapons, pressing the barrels discreetly against the ribs of the remaining 2 Moretti thugs, under the cover of the screaming man. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," Harper wailed, grabbing a cloth napkin and frantically batting at the burned man, purposely knocking him off balance until he stumbled backward into the co-check area, thoroughly neutralizing the threat without a single bullet being fired. Costello watched the entire performance. He saw the cold calculation in her eyes just before she tripped. He knew exactly what she had done. 10 minutes later, the Moretti men had been forcefully escorted out the back alley by Costello's crew. The dining room was buzzing with adrenaline, though most patrons just thought a clumsy waitress had ruined a man's coat. When Harper's shift ended at 2 a.m., she stepped out of the employee entrance into the damp alley behind McDougal Street. The rain had stopped, but the pavement was slick. Standing beneath the dim glow of a flickering street lamp was a massive, bulletproof black Mercedes G-Wagon. Leaning against the hood, smoking a cigar, was Adrian Costello. Harper stopped in her tracks, pulling her NYU hoodie tighter around her shoulders. "That was a dangerous game you played tonight, Harper," Adrian said softly, the tip of his cigar blowing orange in the dark. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied smoothly. "I tripped. I need better non-slip shoes." Adrian stepped closer, his imposing frame blocking the exit to the street. He smelled of rain, expensive tobacco, and power. "You saved my life, and you kept my favorite restaurant from turning into a crime scene. A woman with your nerve shouldn't be slinging veal for minimum wage." "I do fine," she shot back, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "You're drowning in medical debt," Adrian stated, a terrifying reminder of the resources he had at his disposal. He knew everything about her, Mount Sinai. $80,000 in arrears. "You're facing eviction." Harper's blood ran cold. "If you ever go near my mother, I don't hurt women who save my life," he interrupted, his voice surprisingly gentle. He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored envelope, holding it out to her. "I have a proposition for you, Harper. I need someone sharp. Someone who doesn't flinch. Someone who can blend into polite society but has the grit of a street soldier." Harper stared at the envelope. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that pays off your mother's debt by tomorrow morning," Adrian smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. "But you'll have to stop pouring wine and start pouring secrets." The heavy, cream-colored envelope felt like a brick in Harper's hands. When she finally opened it under the harsh fluorescent light of her cramped Astoria apartment, She didn't find cash. She found a certified cashier's check from Chase Bank, made out directly to Mount Sinai Hospital. The amount was for exactly $84,320.15. It covered her mother's surgical arrears down to the absolute penny. Tucked behind it was a black embossed card with an address in Tribeca and a time 9 a.m. Harper didn't sleep that night. By 8:45 a.m., she was standing outside a monolithic glass high-rise on Greenwich Street. She was escorted up to the penthouse by a silent, broad-shouldered man named Leo. When the private elevator doors chimed open, she stepped into a fortress of modern luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, commanding view of the Manhattan skyline. Adrian Costello was standing by the glass, pouring black coffee into a porcelain cup. He wasn't wearing a suit today. Dressed in a dark cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, he looked less like a mob boss and more like a ruthless tech billionaire. "You're punctual," Adrian said, turning to face her. His piercing gray eyes locked onto hers, stripping away the nervous energy she was trying so desperately to hide. "I don't have a choice," Harper replied, holding up the check. "You bought my life. What exactly am I doing for you?" Adrian walked slowly toward her, his proximity sending a sudden confusing jolt of electricity through her veins. He stopped just inches away, his towering frame forcing her to tilt her head up. "I didn't buy your life, Harper. I bought your undivided attention," Adrian murmured, his voice a low rumble. "My organization has a leak. The Moretti family knew exactly where I was dining last Thursday. They know the shipping manifests coming out of Port Newark before my own foreman do. Someone in my inner circle is a rat, and you want me to find out who it is?" Harper scoffed, crossing her arms. "I'm a waitress, Mr. Costello, not an FBI profiler." "You read people," Adrian countered, stepping even closer. The scent of his cedarwood cologne was intoxicating. "You navigate chaotic rooms. You anticipate needs. You hear whispers when people think you're just part of the furniture. In high society, a beautiful woman holding a tray is invisible. I need an invisible ghost." For the next 4 weeks, Harper didn't touch a restaurant uniform. She was violently thrust into Adrian's shadow world. Leo, Adrian's fiercely loyal enforcer, trained her in counter-surveillance, concealed carry protocols with a compact Block 43 and the complex web of New York's 5 borough syndicates. But the real tension wasn't the danger, it was Adrian. He was everywhere. He personally oversaw her progress, his lingering touches on her lower back when guiding her through crowded rooms, igniting fires she fought to suppress. He bought her designer wardrobes, Tom Ford silk blouses, Louboutin heels, Cartier jewelry, transforming her from a struggling college student into a devastatingly elegant weapon. Her first real test came in late November. The annual St. Jude Children's Charity Gala was being held in the Grand Ballroom of the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue. It was the premier event of the season, a place where legitimate Wall Street billionaires rubbed elbows with the city's most powerful, beautifully disguised criminals. Her target was Richard Gallagher, the CEO of Vanguard Capital. Adrian suspected Gallagher was laundering the Moretti family's drug money through his offshore hedge funds. If Harper could get close enough to clone Gallagher's encrypted phone or overhear a meeting, Adrian could squeeze him for the name of the rat. Harper entered the ballroom in a breathtaking, backless, emerald green Oscar de la Renta gown that Adrian had personally selected. She looked like old money. Adrian was across the room, flanked by politicians, but his eyes never left her. Every time a man looked at her for too long, Adrian's jaw tightened. Using her practiced hospitality charm, Harper effortlessly bypassed the security perimeter around the VIP lounges. She claimed she was looking for the event coordinator, flashing a dazzling smile at Gallagher's private bodyguards. It worked. She slipped into the adjoining private library just as Gallagher entered through the opposite door, accompanied by another man. Harper quickly ducked behind a heavy velvet curtain, holding her breath, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "The feds are sniffing around the shell accounts in the Cayman Islands," Gallagher's reedy voice echoed in the quiet room. "I need the Morettis to halt the cash drops for a month. It's getting too hot. Lorenzo Moretti doesn't halt operations for anyone, Richard." A second voice replied. Harper's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. It wasn't a Moretti thug. It was Matteo, Adrian's trusted underboss, the man who had been at Adrian's side for 15 years. Then Costello is going to find out, Gallagher panicked. If Costello audits the Port Newark manifests, he'll see the missing cargo. He'll kill us both. Adrian won't be auditing anything, Matteo said, his voice dripping with cold malice. Tonight Adrian is inspecting the new warehouse acquisition in Hunts Point. Lorenzo's men are already in place. By midnight, Adrian Costello will be a memory, and I'll be taking over the family. Just keep the money moving. Harper clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle a gasp. It was a coup, and Adrian was walking straight into a slaughterhouse. Harper waited until the heavy oak doors clicked shut before she bolted from behind the curtain. She didn't care about the gala anymore. She didn't care about her cover. She sprinted through the opulent hallways of the pier, her Louboutin heels sinking into the thick carpet, her mind racing. She pulled out her encrypted phone and dialed Adrian's private line. Straight to voicemail. He was already at Hunts Point. The meatpacking district in the Bronx was a dead zone for cell service, surrounded by concrete and steel refrigerators. Bursting out of the hotel onto Fifth Avenue, Harper ignored the line of waiting black cars and aggressively flagged down a yellow taxi. She shoved a $100 bill through the partition. Hunts Point, the old industrial park. Run every red light, or I'll double it if we get there in 20 minutes. The cab tore through the Manhattan streets, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon. Harper unclasped her diamond necklace and kicked off her stilettos. She reached beneath the voluminous layers of her emerald gown, unstrapping the Glock 43 from her thigh holster. She checked the magazine. 6 rounds. It felt pitifully inadequate against a Mafia hit squad, but she wasn't about to let the man who saved her mother die in a freezing warehouse. By the time the cab skidded to a halt near the desolate, rusted gates of the Hunts Point facility, the rain had started to fall in heavy, freezing sheets. Harper told the driver to get out of there, gripping her weapon as she slicked through a gap in the chain-linked fence. The sprawling warehouse was dark, save for the sickly yellow glow of industrial floodlights pointing toward the loading docks. Suddenly, the deafening crack, crack, crack of automatic gunfire shattered the night. Harper sprinted toward the sound. She crept up a metal fire escape, finding a shattered window on the second-floor catwalk. Looking down into the massive, cavernous space, her stomach plummeted. Adrian and Leo were pinned down behind a forklift, completely surrounded by at least a dozen heavily armed Moretti enforcers. The trap had been sprung perfectly. Sparks showered over Adrian as bullets chewed into the heavy machinery protecting them. They were outgunned and running out of time. Harper knew shooting from the catwalk with a handgun would be suicide. She needed a distraction. Her eyes scanned the industrial environment, her mind snapping back to her days working in chaotic commercial kitchens. Above the loading dock, running along the ceiling, were massive, yellow steel pipes marked with hazard warnings. Anhydrous ammonia, the industrial refrigeration coolant. She crawled along the catwalk until she reached the main pressure valve control box. Through the floor grating, she saw Matteo standing near the back doors, smoking a cigarette, watching his men close in on Adrian. The sheer betrayal made her vision blur with rage. Taking a deep breath, Harper raised the Glock 43, took careful aim at the heavy brass locking mechanism of the main pressure valve and fired twice. The lock shattered. Harper grabbed the massive red wheel and violently yanked it open. A deafening hiss echoed through the warehouse as pressurized, highly toxic ammonia gas blasted out of the overhead vents, blanketing the ground floor in a thick, blinding, caustic white fog. Instantly, the gunfire stopped, replaced by screams of panic. The Moretti men dropped their weapons, clawing at their burning eyes and throats, choking on the chemical cloud. Leo. But the loading dock doors. Now! Adrian's voice roared through the chaos. Harper didn't wait. She scrambled down the opposite stairwell, pulling the fabric of her torn designer gown over her mouth and nose. She hit the ground floor just as Adrian and Leo broke from cover, taking advantage of the blinding fog to drop 3 gasping Moretti men with ruthless, precise shots. Harper ran blindly through the fog, bumping into a heavy crate. A hand suddenly shot out of the mist, grabbing her throat and slamming her against a steel pillar. It was Matteo. His eyes were red and streaming from the gas, but his grip was like iron. He pressed the barrel of a revolver under her chin. "You little bitch," Matteo hissed, coughing violently. "I knew you were a problem the day he brought you in." Harper couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in her vision. But she didn't panic. She remembered what Leo taught her. Never fight the strength, attack the vulnerability. Instead of clawing at his hand, Harper brought her knee up with vicious, shattering force directly into Matteo's groin. As he doubled over with a breathless wheeze, dropping the gun, Harper spun around. She didn't run. She picked up his dropped revolver, leveled it directly at his chest, and pulled the hammer back. "Move, and I'll put a hollow point through your lung," Harper growled, her voice steady and terrifyingly calm. Suddenly the fog parted. Adrian stood there, his bespoke suit ruined, his face smeared with grease and blood. He looked from Matteo, groveling on the floor, to Harper, who was standing over the traitor in a torn evening gown, holding a gun with absolute authority. Adrian didn't look angry. He looked entirely mesmerized. He stepped forward, taking the gun from her trembling hands and passing it to Leo, who dragged the sopping Matteo out toward the rain. The warehouse was eerily silent now, the ammonia slowly venting out through the open loading bays. Adrian pulled Harper in, his massive hands gripping her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He didn't care about the dirt, the danger, or the blood. "You're a maniac," Adrian breathed, his forehead resting against hers. His chest was heaving. "You're welcome," Harper whispered back, a fierce, unapologetic smile touching her lips. Adrian didn't say another word. He crashed his lips down onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of adrenaline, power, and overwhelming possession. Harper kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his dark hair, entirely consumed by the beautiful, terrifying monster she had just saved. 1 year later, Il Sogno still had a 6-month waiting list. But when the heavy oak doors opened at 8:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, the Maître d'Art didn't look terrified. He bowed deeply. Harper Costello walked in, draped in a custom Chanel coat, diamonds glittering at her throat. She didn't wear a server's apron anymore. She wore the invisible crown of the city's most formidable underworld empire. Adrian walked beside her, his hand resting possessively on her lower back, fully aware that the most dangerous person in the room wasn't him. It was the woman he married. From a minimum-wage waitress drowning in debt to the undisputed queen of New York's most dangerous criminal empire, Harper's transformation is nothing short of legendary. What did you think of that explosive ammonia trap and the ultimate betrayal? If you loved this intense, high-stakes mafia romance, smash that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories. Drop a comment below